Red. That's good. Very people. Oh,
Yep, they're
there's
coming
people.
in.
Oh, people coming in.
Yay! Hi, everybody. Come on in.
There
Let
they
us know you're
are.
here. Say hi
We should
to us.
we should explain that we are running late because I was stupid and forgot my good headset, and I'm at a friend's house and I'm using his, and it doesn't work so well. So there was just a lot of us screwing around trying to figure it out.
As always, as always, that seems
Just
to take us.
assume we'll be there. Just have your drinks and your popcorn, and we'll get there.
It's a good thing I made you guys come in and start early because you
We've
would
been
have
here
messed around
forever.
till the. Yes, we have been because I insisted on it. Because that's just how I am with these kinds of things. I get very anal retentive about stuff. So, hi everybody, welcome.
California,
Um,
Michigan, Swim,
Let us know where you're from.
or
California,
California,
Toronto,
Toronto.
ooh,
Toronto.
places that. Oh, Sydney. What time is it in Australia? I wonder.
Don't tell us what time
Adelaide.
it is in Australia. We'll be so sad that we kept you awake.
We'll feel
Or
bad
it's
for
morning.
them. It's true. It's probably the middle of the
Midday
night. Oh,
Australia. Of course
Cleveland.
it is. Of course it is. It's probably also tomorrow in Australia. Who knows? Maybe it's yesterday.
That's true. That's true. Lunch. Somebody says lunchtime. Oh, Sally says lunchtime. Okay. So that I don't feel so bad if you're not up in the middle of the night. That's a good thing. Okay.
Right.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming to our Science Cafe this evening. I'm Deb Jones, for those of you that don't know who we are. And there's Amy Cook, Dr. Cook, if you'd wave. There you go. And Dr. Jessica Heckman. Hi, Jess. Hi. So we are the three PhDs that teach at Benzie Dog Sports Academy. Right? My degree is in social and behavioral psychology. Um, Amy's degree is in psychology.
Sure.
Anything specific? Just psychology?
Yeah, comparative cognition, the evolutionary story of the dog-human
Okay.
relationship, psychology.
Psychology, just stuff like
Psycho.
that. And
Yeah.
Jessica is also a DVM, so she's a veterinarian. In
Double
addition to
trouble.
having a PhD, yeah, she's double trouble. And I'm not sure what the specifics of the PhD are, genetics of some sort, something that's definitely beyond me,
Yeah,
way
so
beyond me.
the department technically was animal sciences, and then the degree is in genetics, genomics, and bioinformatics. It's just them wanting to put a bunch of words together to make it sound safe. It's genetics.
It
I
sounds
don't know
like
the
it
difference
sounds
between
like they made
genetics and
stuff up.
genomics.
Exactly. That's what I was just thinking. I have no idea what that means, but it sounds
Yeah,
good. It
sure.
sounds very impressive. So we get this crazy idea every once in a while that we ought to talk about something science based. Why we think this, I'm not really sure, but I guess because for me, times since I was in graduate school, but I sort of every once in a while like to look at a journal article and remember what it was I was trained to do, and it's sort of interesting. So tonight, what we thought we would talk about a little is um, a summary of an article that was in Psychology Today. And Psychology Today is, how would I characterize it? What would I say? It's like a popular magazine for psychology.
Mm,
Yeah.
yes, that's fair.
Yeah. um, it gives you some basics. It gives you little bites of information, but they're not always in context. And so Jessica wants to say something, so we'll let her go. She's got her talking cat.
Well, I wanted to mention that particularly what we're reading there on Psychology Today is a blog post, right? So it's not even
uh,
the magazine implies that there's like an editor who's reading it and being like, oh, you should think this through. And this is just a blog post, which is not even like it looks a little more formal because it's on Psychology Today, but it's just someone writing there. I mean, yeah.
and it's a good
Yeah.
thing to. That's a great thing to remember because um, I'm not even sure how many magazines any longer have editors, especially ones that are have a big online presence. And I'm not saying anything about Psychology Today. I don't follow. but a blog post is not an article that is carefully fact checked and edited. So it's good for us to remember that for sure before I say what I probably was going to say. It's just less flattering than what I just said. So there you go.
You said it very nicely, I think. And somebody says here, Reader's Digest for psychology. Sort of, yeah. Sort of like that. I mean, it's been around with less editing. It's been around ever since I was in psychology. So I know it's like the magazine was around a long time. But of course, with anything, they have to have an online presence now. And I think they go for the topics and the titles that they think are going to draw in some attention, just like everything else. And so they did get our attention. I mean, they did the right thing. We're paying attention to what they said here. And I had noticed this article that we gave you guys the link for, a blog. I guess we should call it a blog because that's really what it is. Punishment-based dog training, a risk factor for euthanasia. Go ahead.
Yes. Sorry, blog post. A blog is a collection of posts. A post is one of them. Sorry, but you were actually summarizing what it is for people who haven't read it, which I should let you do. So I'll shut up and let you do that.
You'll never win that, Jessica. People will say they put up a blog for the rest of time. We will not win that one anymore.
That's true.
Nope, give it up.
That's true. You can keep saying it. That's the battle. So it was a blog post on punishment-based dog training, a risk factor for euthanasia. So it caught my interest, and I wanted to what was the actual journal article? What was the actual study that this was based on? And that's what we talked about, the three of us, is let's take a look at the study and then kind of compare it to what they said in the article and see how, I don't want to use the word factual. I'm not sure what the word is that I want to use here. See how accurately this blog post describes summarizes this journal article. And it didn't take me long to decide not very well.
I couldn't do it.
I don't know. We haven't talked about this at all. So between the three of us, we have not discussed at all what we think. So I'll be a surprise.
We like to come in fresh. Just we read it and now we just think stuff. Yeah, exactly.
See, that would be Amy's very organic like that. I'm much more, I need to practice it 20 times, but I did not. But for myself, when I guess let me just say a little bit about.
These are our people.
Let me just say a little bit about the blog post. The title was the first thing that really gets to me. Right? So it really bothers me. And once I read the actual journal article, the title bothered me even more. It really, really annoyed me. What about you guys? What did you think of the title?
Oh my God. I mean, I'll wait for the cat to show up, but I was waiting for where the big emphasis was on that word that they emphasized in the post. And I'm reading, and I'm realizing it's not really what this article is actually about. And we'll get into it later, but I found just as many, like I pulled out like 2 or 3 other things they could just as easily have said it was about, because they were just as connected statistically, to the results. And so I think that got pulled out because that's what our industry is going through right now. A camp war between styles, and this is going to get people talking, but it's really not what this is about. And even if it were, and I'll save this part for later, but even if it were fair to pull that out as a main one, I already have problems with the way they ascertained that connection between the training and the results they had. So even if it were mainly about that, I would still have question, but it's not mainly about that. There's a lot of factors in this paper.
Right. I guess, would it be fair to say this is cherry picking, that they chose a very specific small thing out of the article and acted as if that was the focus, but It certainly wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they wanted to write an article about punishment-based dog training. They sort of wanted to make a point, and that so the blog post is only superficially pretending to be a summary of the article, right? Because the title says it, and then sort of most of the discussion in the blog post is about punishment. But then it's funny, right? Because then they actually do list other factors.
Yeah.
And then they sort of say, like, one of the most striking aspects of this research, in my opinion, is the association between euthanasia relinquishment for behavior problems and the use of punishment-based training.
No.
And well, so what they're saying is that it's interesting she's saying it's interesting to her, right? And so she
Fair
like
enough.
it's a blog post, right? So like she doesn't need to be accurately summarizing anything. She could write about whatever she wants, but it's weirdly structured in that it's sort of like, well, is this you talking about something that interested you, or is this you summarizing the article? Because it sort of starts to summarize the article and then just kind of veers off into this other thing. And as Amy put it, or maybe it was both of you, the title also sort of is like, this is going to be about punishment-based dog training. It's not going to be about the summary of this article, which is about many, many different things.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's when you look at the title, that's what you're expecting. It's like, okay, they found this connection. And so would I be happy if they found this connection? I don't know if happy's the word. I'd be like, well, okay. Well, we always knew there was a problem.
Right. How did you define this? What did you really do here? Let me assess if your methods really make this good connection. That's what I was anticipating doing in this paper, was seeing how they assessed punishment-based training and stuff like that. And lo and behold, that's not really what we found. That's not really what they're doing in this paper.
No, that I was surprised when we actually read the article.
Yeah.
That it wasn't what this summary led me to believe it was going to be about at all. I think
I have so many notes.
I actually have notes too.
So many notes, and I'm not a note taker. I think I took them angrily. That's what I think.
You're funny. But to kind of go even to something a little more basic is the fact that we always have to remember, and I think everybody knows, and it probably doesn't need to be said, but I'll say it anyway, is that everything in this study is correlational. So we can't infer any sort of cause and effect from any of the connections that they make here, or any of the relationships that they talk about here, including punishment and euthanasia, even if that had what the study was about.
Even if, right, yes.
Jessica, you got your kitty.
Yeah, I'm thinking that it's probably we should remember that since they haven't read this article, so we should give them a good summary of what the article is actually about. Maybe you were about to do that, but I just wanted to make sure that we weren't forgetting to say sort of here's how it works.
Yeah, no, I don't think we've even quite gotten to that.
No, we haven't gotten to that.
We're the only ones. We're the only ones who've read the whole article. Anybody out there actually gotten a hold of the article and read it? I don't know that if you have, let us know, but I don't think so.
And I think before we even summarize for people, because I bet you many people can say the refrain, correlation is not causation. Most people have heard such a thing, but few people. I mean, putting it in lay terms for what we're looking at for correlations, or at least it isn't a perfect plain words use of it, but they're looking at dogs who were brought in for a consultation, and they're just seeing amongst all of these people, if they said yes to I've thought about euthanasia or rehoming, what else have they said yes to? What else has gone on? And then what might that mean? And we can't even necessarily say what it means, but it's okay, you say yes to this consult, you're coming in for us for some help. What else has gone on? And oh, look, yes for aggression. Oh, yes for some biting. Oh, yes for some fear. This is all they're looking at. Like, where are all the yeses? And what yes is saying together. It's not the same thing as then saying, well, I know why these connect, which would be causation. It's also not the same thing as saying, I know that everybody's yes is the same as everybody else's yes. They try to get that kind of close, but especially with this thing about punishment, which is what we really want to unpack, is that doesn't have the same definition to everybody. It does to us, but if they ask people if they've used punishment and weren't really specific, we start to lose meaning from that yes as well. So we're going to tell you, Deb will help tell you, someone else will summarize better than I can, what the yeses were that people found in here. But we have to keep in mind that just because it was a yes, my dog has done something aggressive, it doesn't mean that that even is the same all the way down throughout the whole sample that they've used. So correlational studies like this are just great starting points for us to go, that's kind of interesting. We should delve into this little aspect. And that's kind of as far as I feel can take those things.
And if you look hard enough, lots of stuff is correlated with lots of other stuff in the world.
Lots of yeses.
And it has absolutely no relationship. Every once in a while, I'll hear about a correlational study that I really like the outcome of. There was one not too long ago that was along the lines of the more coffee you drink, the less likely you are to develop senile dementia. So I liked that. I'm like, cool. I like coffee. I drink coffee. I'll never get dementia. That's not what that says, though. And even I know that. It's not saying that drinking a lot of coffee means you will not get dementia. All right. So we always have to just remember that there may be some connection.
It's hard to remember it because when you're reading that these are connected, your brain says, oh, I know why that's connected, right? So even as I'm reading, I'm like, okay, remember, because it's English words and they get stuck in your, Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I think it's worth just sort of unpacking a little bit that what else it could be, right? So because it's easy for us to say it could be something else, but I think it's nice for people to hear like what's an example of that. And so just to think through that, what we'd all like it to be is that if you use punishment-based training on your dog, that makes you more likely to consider euthanizing your dog because punishment-based training makes, destroys your relationship. But
made
the other
worse. Made the problem
right,
worse. Yeah.
that's sort of what we all jump to, right? That's what we sort of instinctively want it to be. But then the other possibility, would it be something like the people who are less bonded to their dog are more likely to reach for punishment-based training? That would be one other possibility, right? So there's still sort of a causative link there, but it's sort of going in the opposite direction. Or it could be people who are living in a particular area, perhaps like a more rural area, would be more likely to do both of those things. It's a rural area, maybe their dogs they depend on them for work. And so that may be the actual correlation. So there just could be a bunch of other explanations, or it could just be chance, right? Which is the other thing that I think we'll talk about when we very briefly talk about their statistics.
Let's briefly talk about things. I'm not going to go into what the heck chi-square is anymore. It's been too many years, but I love how really they're just trying to say where are all these yeses, and there's a lot of interesting yeses, some of which point to being more likely to rehome, or what they call reject, which is a combination of rehoming or euthanasia, just all of it. And also some protective factors they highlighted, that there were some reasons why people didn't do it. But before maybe it's not even before, but as we're thinking of these correlations and these stats, I didn't pick this out at first. I forgot to do this. I went back and looked at the table again at the end, near the end, and saw that we had 290 dogs in this study. 290, which seems like a large amount and could well be a large amount, right? Okay. And in the end, there were only 9 dogs that ended up rehomed or euthanized of the 290. So whatever it is we find, your talking cat's getting animated. Whatever yeses we find that seem like, these dogs have this in common. It is 9 dogs, 9 families that had this in common. 9 families, right? Out of 290 people. So aside from sample size, we're looking at most of the people with all of those risk factors did not have any increase in getting rid of their dog, or humanely euthanizing their dog, because most people actually kept going at the time of this study. So I was thinking, all right, we've got 9 dogs now. Now, how interesting are those yeses? Is it that interesting that maybe 9 people had a certain kind of potential connection in training style or in lifetime events or whatever? I don't know. I want someone else to tell me if that's something we can rely on. But I was shocked. I thought it was actually more like, a higher percentage of people, so we could be talking about that. So I don't know what you guys thought about that. I didn't even look at the mean numbers. I was looking at the percentages. I'm like, wait a minute, 9 dogs. Oh,
grab a real cat.
Yeah, I was just basically looking at percentages.
This is Abby, by the way. She's my friend's cat. She's very nice. She's very young. Not sure she's a year old yet. What was I going to actually say, though? You were talking about, the statistics. Yeah. My understanding, so I'm not a statistician, but my understanding is that when the groups that you're comparing are so different in numbers that you can have problems, right? So it's
Yeah.
definitely tough when you have the one group, the group of people who considered, they in the paper they called it rejecting the dog.
Right. It was like 38% of people considered it. It's a big number of people, but they didn't follow through. Only 9 people follow through of the 38% of people. So I mean, it's still worth looking at, but there's no real grand sweeping. Look at the connections there, because it might have increased likelihood of. They might find factors that increase likelihood of rejection, but they're asking essentially 9 people if those factors played a role.
Yeah. And we can go back even further, though, with the subjects. So they started out with 302, and then they ended up with 290 because people can't fill out questionnaires. Right. And they always leave out too much information.
Yeah, the one night was like a rehome dog.
Those were all people who went to, it was what, University of Pennsylvania, or behavioral services there.
There's one behavioral vet. Yeah.
So those were all people who had put in the time and the money to go seek help specifically for their dog's issues. And that's a very self-selected sample. There are people who are like, it's at this point they have done a lot of things too, which they talked about. But we've got people who seem very willing to do quite a bit and to spend money in order to deal with their dog's issues, whatever they might be. So that's not a representative sample of the population of all dog owners. That's probably kind of an upper echelon of dog owners who are going to put a lot of time and money into dealing with the dog's issues. So I'm not really surprised they don't euthanize them.
Exactly. There's a lot more investment, potentially a lot more investment there. And, to be, at least well-rounded, what they're saying is, of the people who came in and are considering, having these serious problems and are considering the potential for rehoming or euthanasia, how many have done it and what might be their risk factors. So at least it's among people who are doing this, what could tip the scales, so they can maybe at least represent other people who are thinking about these issues. But, things that tipped the scales were all sorts of interesting. You could pull out. I was surprised that someone didn't pull out, or that I guess it was a blog post writer, but didn't pull out the purebred and the
that was big.
One of the issues here that they highlighted. So in the end, and if you're reading this thing in the end, after the stats, they do a bunch of discussion. Yeah.
Well,
you want to summarize how the paper actually worked, right?
All right, you do it.
We should definitely go over that before we start getting into all these details. All right, so let me just real quick. Just people have probably figured this out, right? But it's basically it was a bunch of dogs that were seen at a veterinary behavior practice at University of Pennsylvania, and when they came to the veterinary behavior practice, they were unsurprisingly asked to fill out a very detailed questionnaire about their dog's problems and also other sort of related questions. And those questionnaires were stored. And then some period of time later, this study was done, so retrospective study. So they pulled these files and went through them and looked for associations between the dog's behavior and whether people had considered rejecting the dog, which is what they termed either surrendering or euthanizing the dog. So, and they split it up, interestingly, into dog-related factors. So is it something that the dog does, that the dog, could have separation anxiety, or it could be showing some sort of aggression, which is a variety of things the dog could do. And then there were the owner-based factors. I'm trying to remember some good examples of that.
Death in the family, whether they have moved recently.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. If there's another pet in the home, do they have teenagers?
So then there's also the environmental factors.
Teenagers.
Teenagers were a problem, yeah. So exactly. And so then they looked for a bunch of these associations, and then basically the paper just sort of presented those, discussed them, and was done. That's sort of all they did. Okay, sorry, Amy, to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure everyone was on par. And we definitely should not forget also to discuss what punishment meant in that. Yes, I guess since I'm talking about methods, before I hand it back to you.
Well, they didn't.
Because they didn't discuss it, right? So
they didn't discuss it.
I was
Yeah.
complaining to everybody that, so we all actually read this paper at the last minute, because that's how we are. So I was reading it last night, and I noticed that they sort of were like, so we had this detailed questionnaire, and they're like, and so if you want to know what the questionnaire was, what we actually asked people, you can email the lead author of this study and get the
Yeah.
questionnaire.
Right.
But basically, all that it says in this actual paper is exactly what it says in the blog post, which is we asked people if they had used punishment-based methods on their dogs. That's actually
Right.
all that this article says. And it's
Right.
possible that the questionnaire that they filled out had a lot, it's possible the questionnaire says exactly that, or it's possible the questionnaire says, do you ever hit your dog? Do you ever yell at your dog? Do you ever leash correct your dog, right? It's
Right.
possible to ask a lot of questions, and we just don't know, because
Right.
I wish I'd read this a week ago when we planned this, because then I would have had time to email the lead author and actually get that questionnaire, which would be super interesting to
Yeah.
see, right? Like,
We
what
have
did they
no idea. We have no idea what kind of, and not only what kind of, whether and what kind of punishment, but whether there's any commonality in the 9 people who ended up rehoming or euthanizing, because it might be that all 9 of those people had seen a very specific kind of training turned out, or it could have been that they said, yeah, I sometimes used a water bottle once or twice in his life. And then they said, yes, I used punishment training, or they, we know that can run the gamut, right? So, and
Yes.
and not only just that we don't have a real specific pin in what did they do, so that we can correlate it. We're just going with what they said categorically they did. But then later, when they're discussing this, they're drawing, the authors of this article, not the blog post, they're drawing kind of some speculations together, which is what we do. You pull a couple of studies here, there, you put it together, and you say maybe this is what happened. But it's a very big maybe. The author says, quotes a 2009 article about how punishment-based training can increase aggression and conflict. And I know that article, and that's a very specific kind of training they were talking about in that one. So to have this article reference that as if it's connected, it's just kind of spuriously. It might be connected, it might not, right? We know that some forms of punishment and training seem to increase some aggression. And then they said in this very article, and maybe since that kind of training is pretty common, maybe our subjects have connected with those kinds of trainers, because that's really common. It's common to recommend punishment. So there's all these maybes. Maybe it's from this effect we know, and maybe our people connected it. So maybe that's why we're seeing some connection with punishment here. And it's like, that is a far cry. I'm not even saying that's wrong. It entirely could be logical. It's it certainly could be, but it's so far from punishment-based training, or even punishment in training, having a connection to somebody's decision to get rid of their dog. It is completely an interesting speculation, but they don't have anything to hang it on other than an older study they didn't conduct and a questionnaire that they didn't have in real time with their subjects to kind of drill down and say what really happened here, so we can come up with something that is at least common, so we can draw some conclusions. So I just think, and I don't think that the authors of the paper are having a problem here so much as somebody, I don't know, you grab out the word punishment and you think, oh gosh, look, I've got something to hang it on here. I found it strange that it was the word in the abstract, so therefore it was searchable, so therefore it would come up with people who are looking for punishment in dog training. There were many factors in this paper that were just as compelling as that factor that were not in the abstract. And I thought, well, that would meant that, this one was a little more, telling than the rest, and it isn't so. They're all kind of equally, these all kind of correlate. It's kind of interesting, but punishment's the one that was mentioned in the abstract. So I think that's why it got the attention. And got to that's how it got to the blog post writer, because why else would she have seen this article, right?
I think that part of what I want to say to people is that it's very tempting to take blog posts like this and then follow them to the abstract of the paper, and then use that when you're trying to convince someone not to use punishment-based training with their dog. Because I think all of us would really like for fewer people to use punishment-based training their dogs.
Absolutely.
But when you use something like this, leave yourself open to, I go to the person that I, who's at the same training club as me, and I'm like, did you know that there's this study and, it could really destroy your relationship with your dog? And then if they actually go and follow up and look at it, you're sort of leaving yourself open to them coming back and being like, but this doesn't say anything. right? And so and then they're less likely to sort of listen to you down the road. And so that's sort of, I think that's why all of us sort of wanted to go
Yes.
pick this paper. Not the paper
Exaggeration
part.
is a big problem. You know, be
Pick the
against
blog.
something for its merits and its demerits, not for a straw man argument. It will never help to set up a straw man to strengthen your argument. So.
Yeah, we don't want to be, I would like it to be true, but I don't want to be misleading about what kind of evidence there actually is. And I'm afraid that's what we see an awful lot of, is where people are just cutting and pasting the things that they find most interesting, and they're not looking at the bigger picture. You know, they never
Right.
know about the entire article, because who's going to read the article, really, honestly?
No, and there's really there's one little paragraph on the punishment. It's digestible. It's 3 sentences or something, and it seems to say,
It was
hey, it's
so-
plausible that it could be the reason. And as a layperson, I could pick that up and be like, well, okay, the researcher said so. But you know, the researcher also said that your dog being a purebred would make him less likely to be relinquished. If your dog's a mixed breed that did not come from a breeder, he is much more likely in this study to have been relinquished, to have been rejected. And that's not only in the abstract, it's not in anybody's popular press of this article, because that would say, please don't go adopt your dogs from shelters. Please go to breeders and get purebreds, right? Even though that's protective for keeping dogs in their homes, according to these guys, which I'm not saying snarkily, that's what it shows, right? So if it's true that having a purebred not from a shelter is a protective factor, that's great.
Exactly what they called it.
Except it's not, because nobody wants to say that. So this is all about like reporting what we want you to hear based on what I already think you should know, and not just reporting what these people found. I mean, these people found that teenagers were a problem, right? No one's saying
That
don't
was a
have any
pretty-
teenagers.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty big, interesting finding, that 13 to 17-year-olds in the house, and the more teenagers, the more likely the dog rejected. It's a risk factor to a dog to have teenagers. And that's kind of frightening in a number
there's
of ways.
speculation, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, that can pull out more aggression at times, but also like they're saying if the kids were littler, they wouldn't get rid of the dog because it would be harder on the kids. So maybe the people are older and it's easier to do. But it's speculation. It's just an idea for why there's a correlation, and no more than that.
Yeah.
It's just authors' ideas. Jessica.
Right.
Jessica. Cat lady. Is that what you were gonna say? Oh.
Oops.
I was noticing it, and it's interesting because they, well, so on. So a little bit more about the details.
Where-
I don't hear you.
breaking
You're
up.
stuttering. Can you turn on and off again?
The study just that I can
Turn on and off again. We don't hear you, Jessica.
say. So
Jessica.
Jessica.
I checked if the people. First, they said, you know, before you
This is what we were
came
going to
to the veterinary behaviorist, did you consider rejecting your dog? And then they checked with them 3 months after.
Whoa. Can you hear her?
I heard of some of what she was saying. I know she's okay.
Can you hear me better
she's aware
now?
she's a problem now.
Can you
Okay.
hear me?
She was saying that they checked
Okay.
in before. You're stuttering in some fashion. It feels like a connection issue, not your mic. It feels like a bandwidth problem because you're stuttering
Yeah.
in your
Your
video
Wi-Fi
as well as your audio.
Yeah.
But
The
you
Wi-Fi is
look
up a little bit.
smooth again now. Try talking.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead with your point.
Yes.
Okay.
Start it over.
Awesome. By the way, I messaged you guys on the chat room to be like, just talk without me.
Go without me.
Don't make the
We can hear you now. So
Oh.
Um,
I'll talk more.
Right. So then
Go ahead.
they had to check for whether all these factors were associated with wanting to reject the dog in these 3 separate time points, right? Before, 3 months after, and 6 months after. And when they checked, one of the things that I found interesting with the teenagers was that, so you'd sort of think that the same problems would be true beforehand at 3 months and at 6 months. But with the teenagers, they found the problem was with like 12 to 15-year-olds in one time slot, but 15 to 17-year-olds in another one. And this kind of thing where you'd really expect it to be the same and they get these sort of randomly different answers, sometimes to me suggests that the problem is that they're finding that associations are statistically significant that aren't actually. Right. We were going to talk a little bit about how they so they ask a lot of questions, right? They said, is this associated with it? Is this associated with it? Is this associated with it? And they asked what, like 20 or 30 or more?
So many. Demographics of the people. Is age part of this? Is where you live part of this? Is rural part of this? Is
all of that.
Divorce part of this?
All of it. Right? So that's a lot of questions. So when you do statistics on that many questions, then some of them are going to come up as significant just by chance, because you're always allowing there to be 5% that are significant just sort of by chance. And so when you ask so many questions, knowing that therefore that your chances of having this error happen so much more likely with so many questions, you do what we call adjusting, right? Where you make it harder to be significant because you've asked so many questions. And they didn't do that.
They didn't do that. They stuck at 0.05.
They didn't report it, right? So when I see these kinds of things where it's like, oh, this, and you'd expect, but no, but then yes, this other time, that makes me think what's actually going on is that it's not actually significant, but because I didn't adjust, they're getting these random hits. And I could be wrong, but it's interesting too that we all the three of us really like the idea of teenagers being a problem, because that makes sense to us. We like that, right? But the other thing to remember is that all of the questions that they're asking at their veterinary behaviorist office are things that can be a problem. Couldn't be a problem. They wouldn't have asked it, right?
They didn't say what color is your dog's food bowl, right? They're not asking for that. Right. And also, reasons. I mean, I picked it out because I'm like, nobody's telling anybody not to have kids. Like, these are all real factors of people's real lives. And, I don't think you can get at what's a real risk factor for the breaking of the relationship or the needing to have the dog not be in the home on something that's, you guys know me. I'm not the one who usually says, please make a bigger study with more people in it. But I feel like I'm finally saying that because it's not enough here for you to get a robust connection. If you're going to stick with this kind of design, you're going to have so many more. And really think about, if you're going to say, I'm going to speculate as to why this correlation is here, how about before you publish this, get me a phase 2. It may not be able to be experimental. I don't expect you to all of a sudden set up something that really highlights exactly causative factors. But drill down a little bit, because you can say, yeah, it's kind of higher if they have teenagers. And that could be because teenagers are a lot of trouble, and so the dog is one more piece of trouble. Or because teenagers provoke dogs, and so therefore they are more aggressive. Or because teenagers have friends come over. It's like, if you're going to speculate about 5 different things, I don't need your correlation is not informing me anything. We can all speculate that kind of thing. So it would be helpful to not show me the numbers, let me speculate, or just say, hey, there's a number of factors here. A lot of things could be going on. These are the 5 that seem to correlate with a more increased rate of relinquishment. We got to figure out, if these are still robust, we'll do it again. Like, that's what I'm used to seeing.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like it.
But I think this is a lot of what we see, like in initial stages of research. You throw in a whole lot of variables and you hope that stuff comes out. You hope that you see lots of significant findings.
Right. Right.
And they did.
And I did one of those. Okay, so this is a grad student, right? This is a grad student in her lab, I'm sure. It seems like it from the author's notes in the end.
Guessing.
And I've done the same. I had a dissertation and I needed another chapter. And I'm like, well, I wonder if I could ask these people a bunch of stuff and see if, it kind of makes sense according to this theory I have. And I did something not dissimilar. So I think we just have to let science like this come out and go, and these are not the things that need public, media coverage. This is not the kind of study that needs media coverage, unless we're also going to say, please get purebreds, please don't live rurally, because if you live rurally, you're going to be more likely to get rid of your dog. Even though there are only 9 people here, we're still going to say you're more likely if you were one of the 4 people who lived rurally who got rid of their dog.
Well, wasn't it rural was more likely to euthanize rather
To
than
reject. To
rehome?
reject. They said they didn't separate euthanize from
Oh, I thought they did for
they just called it
rural, but
rejection. And then they
they did in
speculated, hey,
general.
maybe it's because they said maybe it's because people who are rural are less connected and their dogs are more utilitarian, and so
Yeah.
maybe they're okay, a little bit more okay with euthanasia. But they said they didn't separate out in the final reduction numbers. They didn't separate out rehoming from euthanasia because they didn't expect for there to be a big euthanasia number. They thought there really would just be rehoming. So they didn't want to have a separate category because of course that would make their numbers too small for analysis, which makes sense. So
No.
yeah. But I mean, I shouldn't change the subject because you're looking through your paper, but like 36% of people who brought their dogs in were considering rehoming. That's a lot of people. I almost said significant. That's a lot of people.
Don't say significant unless you really
I almost
need
said it like a regular person.
Don't do that. You're not allowed.
I want to mention, I just want to follow up. So Lisa McKenzie just said in the chat that she thinks the purebred thing could possibly be because purebreds cost more, and so the owners feel they're more worth saving. And it's an interesting comment because it's exactly the same thing that they hypothesized in the paper. That was the one thing that they said they thought about the purebreds. And I'm not so sure because I feel like once you've had a dog for a while, it doesn't really matter how much you spent on it initially, right? Like once you've bonded to a dog, the dog is valuable to you. So it's possible the purebreds thing. I also wonder though if it's to some extent if it's different groups of people are more likely to get purebreds, like perhaps people with sport dogs are more likely to get purebreds and then are more likely to have the wherewithal to work harder with them, to go to a veterinary behaviorist, to even know that veterinary behaviorists exist, right? Those could be questions. It could also be that when you get a dog from a shelter, you're more likely to get an adult dog who then may actually be coming with some behavioral problems. Whereas when you get a purebred, you're more likely to get a puppy.
Or something right in there could be, I've spent a lot of money. I've gotten this special dog. I had to do some research to get this dog and find this breeder, even if it was a week of research. I still have gone to a breeder and paid money. I paid $4,000 for this dog. That might then increase the potential for bonding from the beginning because there's investment just from the beginning, which then snowballs up. But not so much I spent $4,000 5 years ago, but I spent $4,000 now, so I'm going to invest more. But I see you said there, sunk cost fallacy. It's a question I thought about it, but because it's equally plausible that everybody loves their dogs and are bonded in the same way that it's, that there's some other causative, like I don't expect this breed to be aggressive. I got a poodle. I have a purebred poodle, and I don't expect it to be like this, and so I believe it will change, and I will keep investing. Whereas the person who got something that is mixed breed that looks like, I don't know, a Shepherd Lab Border Collie, they maybe expect, right? So I'm making that up. So it's just another possible cause for why you'd be less invested. But if you got it from a shelter and you didn't spend any money on it and you can't identify what it is, they're saying it's not as protective as if you spent money and have a purebred. But how protective? What are these numbers, right? Someone give me a better idea of just how protective we're talking. Because again, we have, most dogs were not rehomed. Most dogs were kept.
We have such small numbers, we can't say much about that. What was the other thing I wanted to say here that I was looking at? Oh, so dogs from breeders less likely. Dogs who were aggressive during grooming or when they needed to be medicated had an increased risk of rejection. So they talked about that a couple times in the article. They mentioned, of course, that got my attention whenever you talk about husbandry or handling or anything like that.
Right, and there was husbandry in here, yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely a risk factor, that if you have dogs who would become aggressive when they were handled, more like the possibility was there for the risk of rejection. So I thought that was interesting, and all I would say to that is do your cooperative care work.
Wow.
So, everybody do your cooperative care work.
I mean, for sure.
I do want to sort of express frustration with, I guess we've talked already a bit about the blogger, and the person who wrote this blog post, I do believe has a PhD. So let me just double check.
Yeah. Yes. She does.
Yeah, Jessica Pierce, PhD, and so and I've done a bunch of blogging too, but I want us to all sort of think when we post stuff like this about trying to be more responsible and trying to report papers more carefully. And I wish that journalists, by which I include bloggers, would be more responsible, because there's so much irresponsible journalism out there.
There really is. There really is.
And it's just so frustrating. I mean, I don't know what we as consumers can do about it. Although I suppose one could comment and sort of, push back, but it's just, I wish there was
part of
more
why
sort
I'm
of
not a
nuanced
scientist
discussion.
anymore. It's part of why I don't do this anymore. Because I saw science being done, I saw what it meant, which is a very small little piece, and then I saw it either get completely blown out of proportion, or things I thought I knew were fact. I go back to the source and go, oh, no, this is a very modest kind of thing. So I don't know how to get to the question there. Is it Ali? I can't quite read the name there, but you're saying it's hard to know what source to trust, and you're not alone. I think you just have to keep going back to source material, which is hard. It takes a lot of investment, and it's hard to read.
Because it is hard to read.
This one was not open access, so no one but us could even read it, right? Which is interesting, because all these people who might have read that and thought, well, that's a really interesting finding, I want to go read the paper, it's not even out there to read.
You're out of luck. Yeah.
Which particularly when I was blogging more, particularly if I saw a really interesting paper and it was not open access, I tried really hard then to actually cover it in more detail when I was blogging about it, with the awareness, like, it's nice when you can say, just go read it, I'm not going to cover all this for you, but it's nice to sort of describe things a bit more when no one else can read it.
Right, it's true. I don't know if we're echoing.
The person who asked about effect sizes, just while I'm going to let Deb and Amy keep talking, but I'm going and scrolling through the paper right now to see if I can get some actual numbers for you.
Yeah, get some numbers for us, so that it might.
There's lots of numbers.
I couldn't make there were parts that I couldn't. Right, I'm out of my depth, or out of my. I've been out of school too long to really just read tables and numbers and go, oh, it's been. I prefer to not refresh that. No, but
always been my least favorite part. The last thing I wanted to do, I always used to tell my students even, read the discussion section first, and then go back and look at the results.
And see if that's exactly what it said.
Because you kind of get an overview of what they found, and then I want to look at the specifics. Yeah.
This one at least had a table. Oh, she's got.
Yeah, hang on. I got it up. So. We have this table 2, which is the chi-square analysis of factors significantly associated with owner's consideration, blah, blah, blah. All right. So basically, the table lists the factor. So it's things like, is the presenting complaint aggression? Is it aggression towards unfamiliar people, familiar people? Right? So it lists all of that. And then it lists the chi-squared statistic, which is not really useful to anyone. It's nice to have it in the paper. But it's basically when you do the statistical analysis, it gives you this number, and you're like, okay. And so then it has degrees of freedom, which is another part of the statistic, not so useful.
Why are they putting
and then it has
They're always going to be 1. I don't.
100%, yeah. And then they give a p-value, and so the p-value tells you, whether it passed that significance cutoff or not, and how close it is. And then it does have the number of dogs, so it's like aggression towards people, 49 dogs had aggression towards people and 81 dogs did not have aggression towards people. So that's interesting, because that doesn't add up to the total number of dogs. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know. In more than one category a number of times. Yeah.
I guess there's missing information. So it doesn't give effect sizes then. It does give the numbers so that you can see, and it gives whether it's statistically significant or not, but it doesn't give something like, what I would have found really useful would have been something like an odds ratio, where it would be like a dog who bites is this much more likely for the owner to consider rejecting it, right? That would have been a nice calculation to do. But I don't believe that they did. Odds ratios. Oh, right. So they separately did logistic regression, and they did odds ratios.
Oh yeah, they did a regression. I forgot. I'm like, they threw it all at that.
That's right. So they do have odds ratios. Okay. And so the odds
Yeah.
ratios that I'm seeing here are things like 0.4, 0.3, 2.5,
Oh, they did?
3.
Here you
Yeah.
So it's right. So it's like when you get
Mhm.
like 2.3, you're saying this dog is 2 times more likely to
Okay.
be rejected because, and if it's 0.3, then it's 30%.
Okay, so by that measure, we have 5 times more likely if you saw a trainer and they, or a vet behaviorist, or any sought any kind of training help. But you're 40 times more likely if you have repetitive behaviors like licking and chasing. Bites. 40 times. 40 times. That would have been interesting to
Did you
report.
say
No,
40?
wait a minute.
There are
Is that what
40?
you just said with the odds ratio?
Oh Lord, I see it. Wow.
40 times more
Repetitive
likely.
behaviors are
Oh.
tough. That's crazy. Look at that p-value too. It's so small they didn't even report the
That's-
whole.
It's not even a p-value.
It's just 0.
0.
Well,
Why
it's
is that not in the the coverage?
There's a discussion.
It's a discussion.
That's their strongest finding.
That.
It is.
Oh yeah, look down here. There's some other kind of strong ones down here. So aggression towards a familiar person, groomed and or medicated, which Deb was talking about.
Which Deb was talking
It's
about.
almost
Yeah.
11 times more likely. And then
Yep.
here again, children 13 to 17 years, 14 times as likely.
Then you're more likely. And then medical things after that. So like in the pain related, a little bit with not even origin of the dog. God, the origin of the dog isn't even strong enough. Oh man.
You know,
Yeah, and so the
I'm
repetitive
still
behaviors
stuck on the
do show up
repetitive
again.
behaviors.
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
repetitive behaviors do show up again in this other time point that they look at, but it's interesting that the medication thing does not show up in this time point. Right, so when they ask them 3
the 6
months
months.
after, the medication thing shows up. When they ask them 6 months after, it doesn't, even though it was so strong the first time.
Yeah, I don't know what that would be. So the next most thing after the 40 is aggression toward familiar person. And if you looked at it, that just stood out because I didn't see that until just now because numbers. But if you look at all of the things that the dogs were mostly presenting with in order of frequency, so like the problems most people had that they were finding the most distressing were guarding, problems with aggression with strange people, and problems with aggression with strange dogs, and then guarding again. So guarding with like familiar or unfamiliar people. Those were the big problems people brought in, and they were very overrepresented in the sample. And very under the lower end of the representation was problems with familiar people. Yet it's the problem with familiar people that just showed up on this regression as being quite predictive of relinquishment. Am I putting that together right? Because people here have aggression toward people as like 68% of the dogs here are aggressive toward unfamiliar people, and that's why they've come in for help. And that ends up not being numerically supported for rejection?
Yes, I was just looking for how many dogs presented with these repetitive behaviors, since that was their biggest finding, and then that weird that like it, yeah. So I'm having trouble finding the paper how many of them presented.
How many dogs did present that way? They have numbers here.
Yeah. That's the thing to.
No, it's the other table. It's not correlated. I mean, it's not cross-matched. Yeah, so if it's like, if you're 40 times more likely to rehome, but we had 3 dogs that had repetitive and they got rehomed, it's hard to say that there was a 40% more likelihood when we're talking about a couple of dogs.
Yeah, you'd think they would have pulled that out and talked about it for sure.
And said, how many dogs are we talking about?
That's such a huge,
right?
Yeah. That's,
I'd like,
hang on, I found it. So there's this paper that's like the bar charts. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Up.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so look how compulsive behavior.
Yeah.
Compulsive behavior is 1 dog.
It's at the bottom.
It's 1 dog. And it
It's
got
1
rehomed.
dog. It probably did get rehomed, right? And that's why.
Right. Yeah.
Right, and that's why they found it. Huh. Yeah, I'm seeing compulsive behavior. I'm not seeing repetitive behaviors anywhere else.
No.
So unless I'm misreading this, I think repetitive behaviors are just 1 dog, which is what you find, right?
So that
when
one dog
the one outlier drives it.
That dog is 40% more likely to be rehomed. That dog is driving a percentage.
Yeah, so I get all excited about the 40% until we see that it's 1 dog.
1 dog.
Like, so that really doesn't tell us anything at all. that tells us nothing about.
And it certainly doesn't tell us anything
what
about
going
how
on.
that dog was treated, because it's not related probably to some punishment choices from professional training. You know,
Right. Right.
probably not related to treatment unless that dog
Yeah,
had
getting to look at these actual numbers is so important. Like when I look at the studies about spay neuter and whether it affects cancer, and you're like, oh Lord, the p-values are so small. It's for sure. It's for sure. And then when you look at the numbers of dogs who actually, it goes from like 1% to 2%, and it's like, oh, that's massive, right? It doubles.
It's a 50% increase. 100% increase, and it's like, yeah. Yeah, and you know, in those spay neuter articles, I have one of them. There's a like a graphical representation. It's a graph, right? And so you'll see the two bars being like this many dogs get cancer when neutered and this many get cancer when unneutered, and then you see the graph along the side, and it's like really it's like a difference between 1 and 2. It's really a very small range that they are depicting. So don't be fooled by a bar graph, people. If you see bars like this, you have to look at what the range is. It might be 1 to 2, not 100 to 40,000. Then this would be really big. But the stuff they teach you in doctor school. Yes, I'm frustrated, Sandra. It's comical.
We're going to be wrapping up in the next few minutes. Does anyone have any questions for us?
Oh yeah, you guys should be asking us stuff.
I know. I chatted with them and I told them to ask questions. We got the one
Ask
question.
for stuff, because otherwise I got junk.
Yeah, we got
You got
lots of
junk?
things.
Is that what you said?
I said I got some junk. I got more things to say. I don't have to say them, but if people don't have questions.
But if people have questions, we'll answer
Factors
questions.
that increase
Otherwise-
likelihood. I thought
Yeah.
being in a rural area as a factor for increasing euthanasia was a strange connection.
Maybe. I actually wasn't real surprised by it.
I guess you're right, but
Being from a rural area myself, I think the mindset of if something's wrong, just take care of the problem is pretty.
yeah, I guess so. But the thing is, these are people who've gone to quite an elaborate extent to go to vet behavior city university. So, but the thing right after that, it does say that, and this is any dog trainer kind of sees this in their life. They said a protective factor was that these dogs were fearful as opposed to aggressive and not fearful. Amongst all of the aggressive dogs, many of them were in 2 categories. Dogs who had, first of all, most of them hadn't bitten anybody, no bite history. And then most of the ones who'd bitten had bitten with no damage. This is the vast majority of the dogs in this sample who are even coming in for aggressive problems. Okay, so again, we're not talking about the kinds of things that people imagine when we're talking about this. But anyway, it says at the bottom there, factors that decrease likelihood of considering euthanasia is both that there was no broken skin on the bite, but that the dog was fearful. And the speculation was, well, you feel more sympathy for the dog who's scared. You understand that he's fearful aggressive, not just aggressive, whatever that is. And I can see that bear out all the time. I see people questioning whether they should keep this aggressive dog, but going out on purpose and adopting the scaredest dog in the shelter so they can help it. So
Yeah.
they're being a particular factor in this. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard over and over again people say, well, I felt so sorry for the dog. I couldn't
Right.
leave him there. I had to take him. So they did choose that. And so because they purposely chose that, maybe they will work harder or go longer or put up with more before they consider.
Yeah, or feel the sympathy, just it's not his fault. He's, he feels terrible. Whereas an animal is just aggressive, I think as a human, we're not sure. And by just, I mean, you don't see evidence of fear when you're looking at it as a layperson. Maybe you can't understand why would you bite me? For all the things I do for you, why would you bite me? So you can be angrier, right? Maybe.
Jessica,
Why would you guard against me? I give you everything, and you're gonna bite me? Are you trying to talk, Jessica?
Jessica's waving around, yes.
I was
gone.
trying to say
Okay,
we
you're
have a
back.
question.
Oh, we
Oh,
have
we have
questions.
lots of
Okay.
questions. I've been
Yeah,
marking them
no,
all.
we have a question. What would our ideal study look like? Or what fact? Yeah. Yeah. So how would you two? This is really more up your area than mine. I would take some DNA from these dogs and sequence it. What would you guys do?
I would have nothing to do with DNA. Nothing to do with DNA whatsoever. Okay. Well, I think we've already established that their number of subjects, their sample size was too small
It's too small.
to make any conclusions here.
It's too small. And I would want to see, I would be writing questions, and I've written questionnaire questions before. They're not easy to do because you have to actually be careful that you're not leading to anything. You rely on a lot of people to look at your questionnaire questions. It's not as simple as, writing a quiz and getting the answers you want. because you'll get the answers you want. So
Right.
there's a lot that goes into writing a questionnaire, but the kinds of things I felt I wanted to ask these people, or if I had 1,000 more of these people or 10,000 more of these people, was drilling down on the things I know people are not particularly very accurate about in self-report. So I know they're going to self-report their divorce and their age and whether they moved or had a death in the family pretty accurately. I don't need to ask further things, probably. But if we're going to ask about what kind of training you did, because I'm curious to see if it had some kind of effect, I need to be really specific. I can't say, was there punishment? Not that these people said that, but I could never say, was there punishment? Because not only does that have different meanings to people, but they might lump things that I know aren't going to be too bad, like a clap, clap, get out of that trash, bad dog, and a prong collar for every mistake a dog makes. Like, these things are in completely different, settings, I think, or have different effects.
Yeah.
So I want to be asking carefully.
For me, I there's a lot of these kind of studies done because they're relatively easy, where you go and you collect veterinary records, and I'm getting, I think it's useful to do them, but I'd really like to see some studies where people went out into the world and looked at how people take care of their dogs, and those are harder to do, right?
Right.
But it might be interesting to try to find ways to connect with people who aren't bringing their dogs into a high-end referral clinic,
Right.
and try to find out a bit more about what's going on there. Be it something like interviewing people when they come to a regular veterinarian, or be it going to a dog park and interviewing people, or going to a pet store and interviewing people. I think those kinds of things might be really interesting.
Yeah, and getting a completely different sample, being careful about your sample.
Yeah. So I feel like, all right, and so then we also have some, I think these are similar questions from Brittany and Brianna. So Brittany says, what factors should be considered in this study? And Brianna says, given the limitations, what conclusions are actually worth taking out? I think those are sort of similar questions. Like, what do you two take away from this study? Like, what do you find is useful?
I'm still stuck on the I'm still stuck on the grooming and medical stuff, only because that's my pet area. But then I think what is a little robust here is, the diagnoses coming in, like a lot of the dogs. Wait a minute, where'd my thing go here? Fear, aggression, or generalized anxiety was diagnosed in 98% of the dogs.
Right.
And fear, aggression was diagnosed in 88% of the dogs. So I think those findings are probably pretty useful. But that if you are presenting a dog that, that you're having, that has anxiety, that you may also be aggression go along with that. So we need to take a look at some of these factors.
I mean, the stuff that they didn't think they were going to be telling us, which was that, look how many of the sample has fear in it. How many individual dogs are fearful. That wasn't what they were reporting. They were just giving us their sample breakdown. But that's, that people are, a lot of dogs are really, really fearful.
And I'm now also fascinated by the purebred versus mixed breed difference.
Right.
And I think that would be an interesting thing all on its own to explore
to just
separately.
Ask of like 10,000 people. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we have 9 dogs. 9 dogs got relinquished, and maybe, 3, maybe 7 of them were mixed breed and 2 were not, and so they're going on that. But that's too small to draw any stats from, right? But that doesn't mean we can't ask that question. I feel
it opens up to more questions. I don't know that it gives us any answers here, but that's what a study should do anyway. It should give you direction to go the next steps. Any study should do that. And I think this does give us some ideas for where we might want to look at things if you were going to do that.
That's true.
I haven't done research for 20 years.
Right. I mean, Brianna, you're asking what is worth taking out? What conclusions are worth taking out of the study? I don't see any conclusions here. That's, by the way you worded it, which, it's a broad question. What else can we learn and stuff? But what conclusions can we take from the study? I don't see any conclusions to take. I have more questions, like Deb just said. And I have come by the habit or the, mental discipline to try not to conclude almost anything from reading stuff like this, because I know all of it is just pointing us to another thing and having us ask a question. So when I see, hey, what can I take out of this? It never is, well, that shows me that I should be doing this kind of thing. I came into grad school thinking kind of that way a little bit. And then the more and more of these things I read over and over and over again, I'm like, these are just investigations and these are just numbers. And we throw them in to the hopper. We go, all right, that's something. And then we move on and we don't let it change our thinking so strongly. Any one paper shouldn't change anything you think. Because they're just
and papers like this, I love the phrase hypothesis generating, right? And so I feel like a paper like this is really useful because it comes up with some interesting correlations, and that can cause someone else to read the paper, generate their own hypothesis about why that might be, and then design a separate study to go test it. Like, I feel like that's what this kind of paper is good for, is spurring more science. It is not good for telling us how to manage our dogs. It's I think part of the goal of this, so this was published in the Journal of it was like Veterinary Behavior or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that part of the goal was to let veterinary behaviorists know to sort of be more careful with certain people than other people, you know, to know like what dogs are more at risk. And I don't think it even gets to the place where they could use those conclusions, but they might. So that might be something. But yeah, hypothesis generating.
It's not meant for a trainer to hypothesis generate, as are all correlational studies, right? They're all hypothesis generating.
So we have to not sit on one question because we're getting a bunch now.
Oh, good. More.
I know. Are you two looking at the chat at all, or is it just me? Am I the only?
No, I'm looking at this. So I'm going to put this down now and
look at the
not
chat.
say any more points.
Just you guys. So where we're
all
look at all the questions. I don't even start.
Hang on. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put us
go to the question area. Mode. Yeah, put them up on the thing.
Yeah. Hang on. We know how to do that. It is chat Q&A. Okay, and then I'm going to find the next question, and I'm going to click on it. Here we go. I'm clicking on you.
Go into Q&A mode. Q&A mode. On the left.
Here we go. Oh, yeah.
You go to there.
There you go.
She got it.
I marked you from the beginning. I don't know if that's from the beginning or not, or what.
Okay. Recommended resources. Good question. I have no recommendations on that really, because that is sort of what grad school is.
This is why we're doing this.
This is it.
Exactly. Doing this. And it's funny. So I like to tell the story of how I taught this workshop at APD one year, and my talk was on how to read a scientific paper, and literally 5 people showed up. I'm not exaggerating. It was actually a really lovely, we had a really nice chat, the 6 of us, but only 5 people showed up. And so, you know, go to stuff like that when stuff like that happens. It doesn't sound sexy, but and we're going to keep doing these, right? And we're going to keep,
this is hard.
So hopefully that kind
we'll keep doing them.
That's part of what we're trying to do. And I guess the other thing I want to say is that the 3 of us do teach classes at FDSA, and this is part of what we cover in our classes, I hope. It's part of what I cover in my classes, and maybe you two can commit to doing some of that in your class.
You know, I tried to do something like this once, but teaching the skill of how to have a discussion about this kind of thing I found it to be need a bit of real time. Otherwise, I'm just explaining, and you're kind of having questions, is how I envisioned it in forums. But that might be a failure of my imagination, right? Not necessarily a real limitation. So
I actually think
this stuff is hard. It took years for me to learn this.
Yeah, it might be good for a webinar at some point if somebody was interested. You know.
Well, I certainly can do that. Although I basically did that. So the thing that I presented that time about how to read a scientific paper, someone came up to me and said, "You should just do this as whether to spay or neuter your dog," instead, because I'd read through this paper about spaying, neutering, and cancer, and so I actually done that webinar for FDSA, and I called it whether to spay or neuter your dog, and then I did the same thing, and people loved it.
Yeah.
But you know what we could do? It's an interesting point that it takes more sort of real time stuff. So maybe the next science chat we should do Science Cafe. We should take a paper that's open access, and then be less talking and more just answering questions the whole time, right? Like have it be more interactive with people.
Or, you know, I mean, this probably isn't exciting to anybody, but I mean, how the 3 of us here today read this paper and got stuff out of it is we sat down, we made sure our eyes went on most of the sentences, and if anything kind of seemed to zip by. Went, wait a minute, I need to read this sentence again because it's hard. You have to really concentrate and really think the whole time. You can't multitask. You can't think about half some other stuff like you can when you're reading. And so I found when I was reading papers with other people when I was in grad school, sometimes aloud, right? Because when you read something aloud, you hear what it says, you hear what it sounds like. Read it out loud at another person, and someone will go, wait, didn't they just say in the introduction that wasn't the case? Hang on. And then you start going, wait a minute, you start seeing it. If you're really just reading it like you think you're reading a textbook, you won't get very far. And maybe you don't need the stats yet, because who's going to delve into learning stats if you literally have never learned stats? But you can read the rationale for what they're doing, and do like you did in college or in high school, where you say, all right, let me summarize for myself in my words what the point of this is. Do I get it? No, I don't. I got to read it again. And I'm telling you, that can take a couple hours at times because you are used to multitasking. So I think maybe the more, reading out loud was how I did it. As if that helps anybody out there in the world. I read these things just as out loud as if I were speaking, and it allowed me to hear what the authors were talking about. That might not help everybody, but it helped me.
Oh, that's good advice.
Right. That's right, Anne.
Okay. Some people
Yeah.
don't consider prong color punishing.
They
No,
did
they
ask
So could a
them.
layperson, yeah.
They
This
did
isn't
ask them.
so much a question, but I'm putting it up here because I think it's a good. It's
Mhm.
so
Yeah,
Yeah.
they said they had a questionnaire that solicited something about techniques. So it wasn't just, at least I think it wasn't just, did you
Yeah.
use something that you personally consider punishing? It was at least drilling down a bit into, like, what kinds of training techniques did you do with your dog? But I don't know how detailed it was. But if they
Right.
didn't, if they just said, did you find yourself using punishment when you trained your dog? You're out of luck, because we don't get any good information from that. That
Okay,
is
I'm gonna
entirely
actually.
anything.
I am going to print Brittany's question, but because it's related, I'm gonna skip Brittany's question just quick and go to Sandra's,
Okay.
and I'll Brittany's next. Because on the topic of the questionnaire,
Yeah.
a request that one of us. So I think the three of us should get together and figure out who's gonna send that email, find it, and then I guess put it up on the FDSA alumni Facebook group. And if there's anyone listening to this who's not on that group and wants a copy of that questionnaire, get in touch with us and let us know, and we can get
Right.
it. But I think we can certainly do that. All right, and then Brittany's question. So I had a dog who I behaviorally euthanized. I assume this is Cesar Millan methods, and then switched partially before euthanizing. So does the first set of training mean that those methods could have been more built in before the positive ones it tries to use at the end? Just
We don't know.
curious. Yeah, I'm going to let you two answer that because I'm not a trainer.
This is something I'm sure people were hoping a study like this was trying to shed some light on.
Yeah.
But it's not something that a study like this shed any light on. And when we're talking about an N of 1, which to you, Brittany, would mean just one dog, your own dog, answering whether any one thing had the effect you think you see is, I want to say impossible. I don't know if Deb's going to say the same. I tend to speak in hyperbole, but I've seen dogs abused every day of their life who come out perfectly mentally healthy and friendly. I don't know how to draw causative conclusions for sure based on human actions on a given dog and then a given result in that dog. We need 10,000 dogs, or I made that number up, but we need a lot of dogs. That's my answer to that.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think that's well said. And I do want to note that we have lost Deb.
Oh,
who
that's because she
probably
agreed with me and she left.
Yeah, I see her. She's in the process of logging back in.
Okay, there she
I
is.
think
She probably clicked something.
I didn't touch anything, I swear.
Yeah.
But my connection just went. So, yeah, I'm sorry. What would you say about that?
Yeah,
You guys
yes,
just-
so-
An N of 1.
Yes,
Deb,
I think Amy nailed it there. It's just, it's hard to know what had happened. Certainly this paper doesn't shed any light on that.
No, it
and I-
doesn't help with this at all. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you could certainly sit down with someone and give them a lot more information about what happened with that particular dog and sort of talk through. But in the end, you never know what's going on.
You're speculating, right? It's like if you know you did a certain kind of thing and it seems like it could have a connection, you'll draw the connection, right? Like every time we under socialize, we think I didn't do enough, but then if you do it too much, you think, well, I did too much. We don't know how much is too much or how much is too little. A point about the questionnaire, though, while we're on it, I just kind of realized or thought about that this is, tell me if I'm right, Jessica, this is a researcher going to a veterinary hospital and looking at 2 years worth of already collected questionnaires. These were not collected for this purpose. Okay,
Right.
so everybody out there listening, this was a veterinarian, a veterinary behaviorist who just wanted the information that he wanted. Matthew J. Ryan wanted the information. So that person came up with a questionnaire to be able to do a behavioral assessment.
No.
It wasn't a researcher
Right. Yes.
coming up with questions to ask about potential correlations, to ask about potential, conclusions to draw. It was a veterinary behaviorist, I'm assuming here, asking for the information this very specific person wanted to have to know what to do about the history, what's going on with the dog. So we don't even know what kinds of training questions were interesting to that person, right? The researchers didn't design this questionnaire, I am now realizing. This is a questionnaire.
Complicated. I think this I sort of look at this actually as, so this is the Journal of Veterinary Behavior. The last author is Alana Reisner, who I think some of you may know. She's very active online. The first one is Carlos Siracusa, who I've read other papers by, and he's done some other excellent papers. I think this really is sort of by and for veterinary behaviorists, and probably not something the rest of us should, they're taking a look at what their own methods can tell them, and it's,
and maybe it's a questionnaire that everyone uses. It might be the standard veterinary behavior questionnaire that everyone's got. It could
I don't think so. The behaviorists
or could be the one he made up.
Tend to have different ones from each other.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna go to this next question, which I love because this is what I'm trying to do with myself, right? Would you say there's a niche for animal training related level-headed science journalism and writing? So I'm trying to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like I write stuff.
Julie Hecht.
But I get that published.
Right? Isn't Julie Hecht a science writer? She's getting
For those of you who don't know Julie Hecht, she blogs at Dog Spies, and she also writes for dog magazines a bunch. She's fantastic.
And she's getting her graduate or has finished, and she's a dog trainer, so she's not blind to the forces that that we're talking about. She was.
Yeah, I guess she's a dog trainer. She's a dog trainer in her research, but I think
thought before she went to grad school. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I thought before she went, she was trainery. Maybe I'm wrong. I met her at a trainer conference. Maybe she only came as a.
She does go to trainer conferences these days.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
A million years ago. She either way, she seemed very dog.
She's fantastic though. Yeah, no, she's very dog oriented. She's a wonderful person. She does a really good job explaining these kinds of studies. So she's a great person to follow. If you guys don't know about Dog Spies, go look her up and follow her. The other person is Zazie Todd. Zazie Todd, who does have a PhD and blogs at Companion Animal Psychology. She actually does a really nice job summarizing a bunch of studies. So she's another really good one. And then she's more behavior oriented and less, sort of training sports oriented. But she does a good job too.
Deb's holding her muzzle up.
Yeah,
I'm holding my muzzle up.
Chat. Hang on.
Just the one thing that I would say about what you're reading, know what you're reading, and pay attention to whether it is just a blog post, which is that is somebody's opinion, as opposed to something that is really based on scientific evidence. Because people often present things as if they are fact, or as if they have a lot of research underneath them, and that's not always true at all. So really be careful about paying close attention to what you're reading, who you're reading, what their background is. And just don't assume because somebody has published something and that they sound like they know what they're talking about, that they actually do, because sometimes we can all be fooled by that.
That's right. If everybody knows that the guilty look thing, those people who out there who've seen on Facebook a lot of the that dog guilty look is not really the guilty look. That's Julie Hecht. So.
Oh, okay. Cool.
They spilled water on the ground and had a dog and a person encounter it. The dog's like, "Oh no, water's on the ground. I'm going to be in trouble." It's like, yeah, it wasn't pee, it's water. Yeah. Off topic. Yeah, next question.
All right.
There's a chihuahua.
What about purebred rescue? If
I'm having
purebred
trouble parsing this question, Anne, if you're still around.
and
Oh,
think-
so if purebred equals breeder and mix equals shelter,
Yeah.
what about purebred rescue? They
Yeah,
didn't
I mean,
break it down.
Yeah, they
They
didn't break
didn't
it down.
break it down.
They just talked about purebreds and mixes.
yeah,
And
They
I
just-
was
so they
certainly
just
when I was talking
asked,
about
you
it,
know.
yeah, I overgeneralized saying that most purebreds didn't come from shelters, but yeah, some do come from rescues.
yeah. Well, they sort of
Yeah, I'm sure
talked
they just
about it
asked.
as if the purebreds were from breeders. They, and a couple times in the article, they sort of made me believe that's what would have happened, but I may be wrong about that. I may have missed something.
It's just one of those questionnaire things of, is your dog a purebred? Where did you get him? What did you,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we don't know, Anne, sorry.
We don't know. Things we can't
I
say.
think we may be wrapping up.
Oh, we're out of questions?
I think we may be, and I have to get up early tomorrow.
Me too.
We're wrapping up
Go
because
learn about how to do
you're.
genomics in the
'Cause
cloud.
it's late. We're wrapping up because we're tired now.
All right. Who's got a lovely note from Linda saying thank you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. As you're signing out, I just want to put a quick plug in, and these two will do the same. I have a class at FDSA starting in April. It's not about genetics, it's about biology, but it's about like the biology of how to make a good performance dog. You two, go. What are you teaching?
What am I teaching? What are you teaching, Amy?
I'm teaching Boogeyman. It's Boogeyman month. It's Boogeyman term. Dealing with the Boogeyman, which is help for your fearful, your stressed, your anxious dog using social play. So, yeah, you come to the class and I teach you probably different tools than you've been using before to help your dog relax and connect to you and take in new information through the process of socially playing with you. If you want a gold spot, you have to talk to me beforehand, and I think registration opens Friday. So you got to talk to me tomorrow. Don't talk to me Friday morning. It's not enough time. Send me an email. I'll send you a way to get a chance to get to a gold spot. But other than that, silvers and bronzes, you can just register as normal. And it's going to be a great one because I already know who's coming, and I already know who's coming at silver. There's going to be a lot of discussion in this one. So if you're someone who likes to read a lot, this is your Boogeyman term for sure.
Cool, and I'm doing cooperative care, so definitely everybody should take that at some point in time because all your dogs are going to be handled.
And because if dogs bite people while you're doing their nails, they're more likely to be rejected, apparently.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
what I'm taking away. That's what I'm taking away from this article. I'm also teaching focus, so another thing that everybody should take at some point or the other. It's one of the foundation classes that people don't even know they need until they realize something's missing. So, and then you go, what's missing? And I'd say, your dog's not focused. Why not? Because you never taught them. So we go back and we show them how to do it. Okay, that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much, everybody. Unlike last time, we now know how to shut it down. So sorry to get to watch us debate about.
Allie talked to me. Sorry, Allie talked to me on the side. You can look up Mark Beckoff, or you can just text me. I'll answer your question later.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming, and we'll get this. Well, Melissa will get the link up of the recording.
Yeah.
All right.
You can watch us at your leisure some other time.
Yes.